Hey, how's it? I'm Dan, and this is Breathing Underwater's Musicast, and I'm here with the illustrious, prestigious, and beautiful
Dave.
And today just so happens to be our birthday together. We're twins.
It is. We are.
And so Dave's in town, and we thought we'd record a couple episodes of things together to catch up on some things we wanted to talk about. One of those things is Weird Al, because 'tis the season for Weird Al. Apparently he's got a big uptick in recognition and sort of, zeitgeist awareness because of the movie Weird that came out, like a couple months ago.
Oh, really? That got him...
Yeah, I've been seeing his name pop up a lot on recommended videos of like interviews, and he's been doing, a lot of TV spots and some, fun stuff here and there. He even made a lyric video for his song. Have you heard the new song that's in the credits of Weird? It's called Now You Know.
No.
It's fantastic. Well, you'll have to check that out because it's definitely everything that makes Weird Al great. But the reason that he and I wanted to talk about Weird Al was to commemorate and to, for posterity's sake, just put out in the ether our Weird Al story, because he, I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on your part, Dave, but I would say that Weird Al was our introduction to rock music.
Yeah.
I really don't feel like we would be where we are in terms of our interests and passions, mindset about music, because we were brought up, and you can hear on an earlier episode of this podcast, our father, whom we interviewed about his childhood and profession being a classical French horn player. Dave is enjoying some detox tea as we speak. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of household we were brought up. Our parents met because they were horn players in the Chicago area, and they met through mutual classical musician friends. And rock music was just really not part of their culture, their family
not at all.
Structure, interests.
No one in their family was rockers.
Really not, yeah. Rock and roll was definitely, in our household in the 80s and 90s, was a bit of a taboo subject, and it had a lot of the connotation that I think it, had in similar uninitiated households as being music for...
degenerates?
Yeah, like our upstanding children aren't going to... listen to that kind of music. We're gonna, they're gonna listen to, the music that we wanted to listen to independently the most, I think, was before that was movie soundtracks, because we loved movies. And there were movies that we weren't allowed to see yet when we were younger. Like, I remember Batman, 1989 and stuff like that. We were into Batman, of course.
When that came out.
So we weren't allowed to see it, but we were allowed to read some of the comics and get the toys and listen to the soundtrack. So that made us feel still part of the whole phenomena that was going on with that kind of stuff. But I really credit Weird Al, though, as being that turning point for us to be exposed to. I'm sure we would have been at some point later. Obviously, we would have been exposed to all sorts of stuff by the time we got to middle school. We're talking elementary school. So I think my first memory of Weird Al was a gray cassette tape that our best friend at the time, our mutual best friend Greg, growing up in Buffalo, New York, and we were playing in his basement, and I think you had heard it first because you guys had been hanging out without me at some point. It could be one of those false memories. I have a memory of coming over to Greg's house and both of you telling me you need to listen to this. Mm-hmm. Kind of like that scene in SLC Punk, and he's listening to Rush, and he's defending Rush, and he says to Bob,
puts on Punk,
and he's like, "What is this? This is new." And I don't remember which album it was. It might have been Even Worse or something before it. I'm pretty sure we were in third grade. So we were, maybe 7 or 8-ish, somewhere in there. So yeah, we were, again, our parents were classical musicians. We generally were a kind of a Protestant religious household, so we were pretty sheltered.
Yeah,
our parents were pretty nervous about us being exposed to
not the
evangelical
extreme,
no,
repressive. It was more just
but still,
it wasn't on their radar as far as edgy music.
No, but they were
so it's very averse to them.
But they were definitely
music.
I don't think it's critical to say that they were ignorant of the counterculture and rock culture and the stuff that we would eventually embrace fully. So anyway, you guys had me listen to Weird Al. We were all hooked from an early age. My first memory of us owning a Weird Al album was you, Dave, investing however much it was at the time. I don't know, $10, $20, something, saving up allowance. It was a really big deal for you.
Really?
Yeah, I remember, because I wanted to spend my allowance on toys or something, but you wanted to buy Even Worse by Weird Al. And I remember the first time I saw that cover with him in the leather jacket. And of course, I didn't get most of it because not only were he and I not exposed to rock music, we weren't exposed to any popular current music. I remember hearing
about
about...
listen to that stuff.
No, they didn't. And we didn't have any other, like older siblings or cousins or uncles or, a lot of people have somebody that they get exposed to stuff, even if their parents aren't the one. They have, somebody that like, we didn't have anybody that was, showing us their like Metallica records or anything at that age. No. We had no exposure. So we didn't get a lot of the parody.
Yeah.
And we'll get more into that in a minute, but
you have a better memory than I do as far as young. I remember getting that album, but I just kind of like my memory just kind of appeared.
I remember going to a store like whatever we had at Buffalo Mall at the time, that whatever mall that was in Eastern Hills,
something like that. One of those '80s malls that died.
The
in the
Two Pines Mall. That was a Back to the Future reference.
Oh,
my pine.
Right.
Anyway, so you bought Even Worse, and I just remember we were listening to it repetitively. I remember we went on a road trip or something, probably one of our many trips from Buffalo. We grew up driving from Buffalo to the D.C. area because we were born in the D.C. area, but we lived in Buffalo for elementary school years, and then we swapped. We moved from Buffalo to the Baltimore, D.C. metro area. We drove back and forth, 8 to 10 hour trips pretty regularly. To visit family and such, and I remember like us listening to that. I just remember asking Mom. We got to the end of like the good old days on that album and the old cassette days. It would be, you get to the end of one side and it kind of rewound the other side because and so we would just flip it over and start over.
Right.
So I remember that, and I remember Mom being a little nervous of some of the references, some of the innuendo, some of the implied like violence and things on some of the songs.
Oh my God. It's so vanilla.
Yeah. But it was edgy for us. There was a lot of stuff in there that we just never heard before, like guitar solos.
Yeah.
Drum solos distorted guitar and just like the full band kind of thing with the bass drums. Guitar, keyboard, vocal synergy. But it was okay because it was more or less, like you said, vanilla, wholesome. It was family friendly for the most part. And the stuff that was a little bit more edgy, I think Mom and Dad trusted that we didn't understand. And I think there were so many things in his lyrics that I was curious about, that I'd never understood before. Like I remember Trigger Happy and that whole thing and like understanding about like, gun violence and gun control politics and stuff was not on my radar at all until that stuff came around. And there are lots of different innuendos and things that he would have, whether it's like romantically or otherwise. There's a lot of stuff that I remember asking Mom and Dad about, and then me kind of like, ooh, the birds and the bees. So Even Worse. And then we just started buying more cassettes. I remember we got like Alapalooza at one point. We got
80s stuff.
Well, 80s and early 90s. Yeah, the UHF and Dare to Be Stupid and Off the Deep End. We had all those on cassette tape.
Eventually, we got the collection of his music videos. It was like all his 80s ones.
Yes, and then I think that was like the next big like step or stage for us in understanding his stuff. I remember for Christmas, and I think it was our 5th grade, maybe 4th grade. I think it was 5th grade. Remember we got those Tasmanian Devil like Looney Tunes shirts that were like really popular at the time that took up the whole front of the shirt. Taz, yeah. We opened up a cassette of the collection of Weird Al music videos at the time. And of course, we didn't have cable. We didn't have MTV. I mean, I think we got cable like a year or two before, but we weren't allowed to watch MTV and stuff. And I understand. And we've seen Behind the Music where they talk about how Al wouldn't have had a career without MTV and stuff like that. But we weren't privy to any of that. So, getting that visual aspect too. Again, there was so much parody in there that we didn't understand, like the direct and indirect, kind of like stylistic parody stuff that he would do. But like the Michael Jackson stuff and Madonna outfits and the hair teasing and all that kind of stuff was like, there was so much back then that we just didn't, because not only were we not exposed to rock, we weren't exposed to popular music like we were saying.
Yeah.
And I knew that Michael Jackson existed, but I didn't know anything about his music. I had never heard anything from Madonna and a lot of the other big mid-level stuff.
Our parents weren't playing popular radio stations. Our My mom played like, some like old like 70s, 60s like folk type stuff.
Yeah, and I remember she used to listen to the oldies stations
Yeah.
in Buffalo when we'd be driving around. Oldies back then were
Yeah.
like what 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
Not now where
Well,
it's like
she wasn't back in like
90s.
the corny 50s era. She was more 60s.
60s,
stuff.
70s. Yeah, that
Peter
was
Paul and Mary, Cat Stevens, Simon Garfunkel. I like all those artists still, but
absolutely. They weren't as like overtly edgy as
not
what
the
we
more
would get
corny
into.
folk, but the stuff that had more soul and art, like Cat Stevens. And...
Yeah, we got the tape and we just would watch that obsessively. And then there was another collection I remember that came out. It might have, I don't think it was just Alapalooza videos, but it was like an Alapalooza cover, that that Jurassic Park parody cover. Mm-hmm. And it had like Jurassic Park, and it was never on an album, but it was the Crash Test Dummies one, the headline news.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I mean, just so many things that I still to this day know the Weird Al version much, much better and more clearly in my head than the original.
Yes.
I've heard
Same.
Like a Virgin and Beat It and stuff, but
the original sometimes feel more foreign. I was like, oh, right,
yeah.
right, the original.
Yeah, like I'll hear something and I'm like, oh, this reminds me of that Weird Al song.
My Sharona?
Oh, that is that. Yeah, like this is the Weird Al song. Oh, he didn't do that first. That was somebody else. Yeah.
They wouldn't have been stuff I would listen to anyways. A lot of the more popular stuff.
Yeah.
As opposed to more of the rock and hip hop stuff.
If we were allowed to.
Yeah.
If we had been allowed to, but we just wasn't on our
gravitated to
radar.
rock and later on hip hop so organically that I don't think we would have been into that stuff.
And then the next big stage though was I think we were in like 6th or 7th grade by the time that Dad took us to see him in concert.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that was we were living in DC at that point.
Were we 12?
Yeah, I think we were 12. It was 1996.
All right.
So you can hear I've talked about this at more length in my episode about show reflections during my grade school and college years. Hearing stuff like, especially Smells Like Nirvana, was the first time that I'd heard anything like that abrasive, even at a Weird Al level, and I wanted more.
Distorted guitars.
Yeah. And then there was, he did the Give It Away parody, the Yabba Dabba Do Now.
Yep.
Flintstones one and stuff. So there was that like adjacent, like kind of rock, funk stuff. And he did a lot of originals too that were more like old school rock and roll. Mm-hmm. But all that, like I Love Rocky Road and anything that had distorted guitar and like big drums. I just ate it up. It wasn't just because it was like, well, I mean, it definitely wasn't because it was a parody of something, because most of the time we didn't even know the original.
Yeah.
Or know it anywhere as well.
We're supposed to later. Yeah.
It was just the style and the energy of the music. I think, it just spoke to me in a way that no other music had, like just the stylistic side of that. That was definitely my gateway. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah. For sure. Yeah, we wouldn't have got into rock if it wasn't for Weird Al, I'd say. I still remember the sprint period of my memory seeing him live when we were 12 and just that feeling of your ribs shaking from the bass and the whole...
It was so loud and wonderful.
Which was only, 3 years later when we saw the Deftones,
Yeah, that's crazy. No, less than that. Deftones was 1998.
Right.
Yeah. And Deftones is, again, you can hear on that previous episode about my formative concert reflections. That was our first like real rock show. Though I'd say that the Weird Al show in '96 was a real rock show too, especially because it was so performy, with all the costumes and the dancers and showiness of rock. It was definitely like a big performance too. Which a lot of people would argue that that's what a rock show is supposed to be too, is entertainment. So then by that point, we were in like 6th, 7th grade. I was aware of stuff like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff. So those things were at their kind of like peak. Grunge was at its mainstream bubble burst, but alt rock was on the rise when we were when we were getting into that solid. I think that's why we started. It wasn't just because it was popular, but because we had friends that like were first introduced to the Beatles or to like classic rock like Zeppelin and
Aerosmith,
and that was like their introduction. But I think because of like Smells Like Nirvana, I loved his version, but I also loved the style so much that I wanted to get more of that too, and that's why I went straight from that to Nevermind.
Oh yeah. I remember when you had the Aneurysm single.
Yeah, I got that.
We
was
were kids.
I think the reason that I was able to get that and not an album first was
Yeah.
because it was cheaper, because the single, but also because it didn't have the lyrics printed in it. And our parents used to, when we were in early middle school, they would read the lyrics in the liner notes before we were allowed to buy the CD to see. And that's why like we weren't allowed to get Dookie.
Yeah.
From Green Day,
when that
I was allowed to get Nevermind because it didn't have all the lyrics in it. And there was a couple other things I remember they rejected. It might have been Pearl Jam. I do remember though, before we got Nevermind, our first rock record, our first rock album was Pearl Jam's 10.
Oh, right.
On cassette, yeah.
Right.
I think we were getting CDs around that time, but like CDs and cassettes were both kind of equally accessible, and
weren't CDs more expensive?
Yeah, CDs might have been a little bit more expensive. So I think that's why we were still investing in cassettes, even though CDs were available. Because I remember my first CD that I ever bought was the Terminator 2 soundtrack.
Oh.
Again, another movie that we weren't allowed to see yet, but I was allowed to listen to the music, so that made me kind of feel like I was in it. You know, and I remember about Terminator 2 and Aliens soundtracks on CD while we were still getting like grunge tapes and stuff like that.
We were just too young to be in like the original grunge stream. We were like we weren't even a generation different. We were just the age a few years just too young for that to be. But I mean, I'm looking at the Soulfly tattoo on your wrist. I mean, all that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Weird Al stuff.
Yeah, we have Al to thank for
the rock,
for everything, for the music that we ended up. You know, the reason we wanted to play instruments and make podcasts and stuff. So I think like the next like inflection point for our evolution of music interests and Weird Al was Bad Hair Day came out. We were in middle school. We got that on CD, so that was like our first Weird Al like CD, I'm pretty sure. And I remember we bought it at base because at the time our dad was in the Army Field Band at Fort Meade, Maryland. That's why we moved from Buffalo to Maryland. We were able to shop, at the commissary, and we got discounts on food and clothing and things, and they had a music section. I remember we got Weird Al there, and I also got that Pearl Jam single, the one they did with Neil Young. I really did like that Weird Al album, and and it had so many classics on it, like Amish Paradise and Gump and The Night Santa Went Crazy, and Phony Calls.
Right.
And at that point, we were more aware of like pop music and pop culture, and so like a lot of the references, and we were able to go back and listen to his earlier catalog and understand, and we were more exposed to the Michael Jacksons and stuff, the pop music of the 80s, and understand a lot of the, New Kids on the Block references and stuff. And it was kind of coming back around, and we were, I feel like we were at this sort of like peak of like really connecting with what Weird Al had to offer. But then, I don't know about you, but I remember having some friends over, and like I remember the CD had come with an insert, like a little poster of the cover of Bad Hair Day, and I had it up on the wall with like all of our other posters at the time, like Pearl Jam and stuff. And I remember we had a couple friends. Remember the Chris's?
Yeah, judgmental little kids.
And I remember them saying like, "Oh, Weird Al, huh?" Like the P word was thrown around a lot, especially by supposed friends of ours in middle school. Kids with long hair and plaid jackets and patches, and we thought that they were like the coolest things, and we wanted to live up to that standard of like being a headbanger. I don't know, did we call that in middle school? Or was that a high school thing?
Middle school.
Headbanger.
That was kind of a dumb thing in high school when those exact clicks were not.
Yeah, that's true.
Dumb.
Yeah, it must have been a middle school thing.
Those dumb labels.
I remember kind of being called out that like Weird Al was kind of a poser-ish move. So that the P word is poser. You're a poser. If we try to get on the bus and one of those Chris's would say like, "Hey, stop. I see you have a Pearl Jam patch there. Name 5 songs,
I remember that.
It's
name
the
5
same
song, name 10 songs.
The same gatekeeping stuff that like Finn McKenty talks about all the time now. Like you got to prove your worth to be part of something that if you're not part of it, that thing will die because you need new, fresh people to support it.
Yeah.
Economically.
Can't be a closed system. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my kind of falling out stage with Weird Al a little bit, like, and it wasn't anything like I rejected him or anything. I just kind of stopped listening and investing in his.
Well, we got into so much other rock and hard,
and that was the other part of it too. Was like our repertoire, our collection was, and our interests were expanding so much that Weird Al was just one little part of that.
He fell off the radar for years. Weird Al is more like up and funny and not edgy, not and we were teens, and it was normal that it's not really.
Yeah.
At least back in our day, wasn't as much of a teen thing.
We didn't integrate as much as move on. But I gotta say though, I don't remember ever having a complete rejection or like thinking in my heart like,
oh no,
screw this guy, you know, like
I remember in the early 2000s, late 90s, when we were like still in high school working at Circuit City, and like I just remember looking at CD sections like, what's Weird Al been doing? Like I said, oh, Running with Scissors.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, there's an album or two I missed. Oh,
All About the Pentiums was pretty big on
right.
MTV, and I thought that was pretty fun because you know All About the Benjamins was so big, and we were avid MTV watchers in the late 90s, and then like getting into college and kind of reconnecting with I was trying to keep my pretension in check when I got into college, and I give a big shout out to the Harry Potter craze that was building at the time, because if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would have been. And I've talked about this more on the Musicast side of a more recent episode I put out called Ouroboros Franchises, where I talk about my history with Harry Potter a little bit. That kind of helped me realize that I was being a little too overzealous and not integrating as much that I could have been. It was a struggle at first. I was like, oh, I actually really enjoy reading Harry Potter books, but it doesn't seem like it's cool. And I was like, wait, why should I care about that? And that kind of helped me come back around to other things like Weird Al. And like you said, I went back and looked to see which albums we had kind of glossed over or missed. I remember towards the end of college, I had caught up with I celebrate his entire catalog.
I celebrate the guy's entire catalog.
You did, yeah, you did that.
That was from Office Space.
Oh.
I mean, that was like mid 2000s. Right after I graduated from college in 2006, he had put out, or around that same time, he had put out Straight Outta Linwood, which I think was like, he had been not like totally tanking, but I think
Do you realize I didn't get my bachelor's till 5 years after you got yours?
Yes, I know. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. Yeah, they're called doctors.
Did you hear I finally graduated?
Yeah, and just a shade under a decade, too. All right.
You know, a lot of people go to college for 7 years.
I know. They're called doctors.
Which you sort of kind of are.
13 here to get a master's.
I went back and, you know, I was more cultured. I was an educated suburbanite, you know, or urbanite at that point, because I've been living in Philly and DC and New York, and like I was like, oh yeah. And I got caught up on Weird Al, and I was like fully, you know, more aware and enlightened about his references and material and content and everything. So I was like all back in. And then he came around a couple times during that Linwood tour, and we got to see him a few more times. And the Linwood stuff, I think, and because of like White and Nerdy, really propelled him back into more of a, I don't know if he was ever like mainstream. I mean, maybe he was in the 80s before we were aware of it, but I don't know if Weird Al was ever like full mainstream.
Yeah, he walked the red carpet a lot. He was an icon that was always there. You know?
Icon, I think that's a good word for it. He was always he was always part of things. But like I know in the late 90s, like early 2000s, I don't think his album sales were as high as they had been.
No.
I think he was kind of like plateaued out a little bit, but then the Linwood stuff I think put him back on the map, cuz he did White and Nerdy and he did Canadian Idiot. You know, and those songs were so big on their own right, you know, the originals, that I think they really helped put him back. And he did the one with the T.I. song, Whatever You Like, You Can Have Whatever You Like, If You Like. During that time, we saw him collectively. I think we saw him a few times. So I saw him in D.C., and again, I'll talk more about this on a future episode where I talk about post-college up till now, more or less, concert reflections like I did with that earlier episode. But just in brief, I saw him in D.C. during that Linwood tour, and then Dad and I saw him again, at Ram's Head
in Baltimore.
But yeah, so I got to see him like on a more stripped down, like club level. He had some costumes, but not the full thing. He had some backup dancers during like Smells Like Nirvana, but not the whole big, you know, shebang. He didn't do the parody or like, you know, fake interviews with Madonna and, you know, and Jessica Simpson and stuff. Like he didn't do all that for the costume changes because it was just a more stripped down kind of thing. And then so you saw him, you said in 2012?
Yeah, after that tour of that.
So that would have been, I don't know, 2012, like Alpocalypse maybe?
I think so.
Where was it?
At the University of Buffalo.
Well, you were getting your grad degree?
Yep. It was great. I remember a kid had to be like 10, something like that, saying, "This is the best day of my life," or something like that. I'm like, wow.
I always think about that when I go to a show and I see younger kids, and I try to remember what it was like for us when we were young and starry-eyed about going to shows. And it was like, this is all so new and novel and crazy
Yeah.
and big and awesome.
Yeah, I work with a client who's like 20 and goes to like all kinds of hardcore metal shows, and I never act like I've been there, done that. I'm just like supportive, like awesome what you're doing, awesome what you're into.
Yeah.
None of that like, oh yeah, I've been there. Well, like I'm all old and been, There's some people have this ego about that. All the hardcore music these days, which is actually really good. So this new stream of hardcore. So just to not be a gatekeeper, not be like that old.
Absolutely. But anyway, back to Weird Al. The summer before the pandemic, right? The summer of 2019, Al came.
Right.
He was on his No Strings Attached tour where he was playing with full orchestras. It was like a wonderful full circle experience because just like in 1996 when Dad took us to see Weird Al, then we kind of returned the favor, and Dad and Dave were in town, and they came in, and we all went to see Weird Al together again.
Yes.
As adults, and that's kind of like the thing that I want to make sure is known is that like even though there was a bit of a time where Weird Al wasn't as much in my consciousness or like level of passion to listen to regularly, he was the beginning and I think will be the end of everything when it comes to music because even if he retires,
In the end of everything.
of everything. Sounds like
Weird Al's the synchronicity of the universe.
I don't know. I think about it too. Like, we've been to Ozfest where we see, people our age or older that have kids. But I don't know. It's not quite the same. It's like you're getting into your parents' music. But Weird Al has always been for everybody. Mm-hmm. As far as I can tell, it's never been like a generational thing. Mm-hmm. Now that we've had all these experiences with Weird Al, obviously, he put out UHF sometime, what was that, like late 80s?
Early 90s.
As far as I recall, and it's been, I think I've watched it more recently than you because I bought a copy of it at one point. It's just so perfectly Weird Al. It's a parody, but it still has, it's lowbrow, but it's clever. It works on several different levels. Mm-hmm. The most recent thing to, the output that's happened, of course, is the movie Weird that was put out by Roku of all channels. I don't know why they wanted to make that like their flagship original content to get people interested in the Roku channel, but there it is. Did you watch Weird yet?
No.
Oh, you still haven't watched it?
Just haven't seen it.
Man. Well, let me tell you about Weird. Weird was totally fine. It's unfortunate to me that the best thing I can say about it was that I laughed enough, and I'm glad that it came out. I wish I could say that it was everything that encompasses why we love Weird Al and why he's been part of our, musical experience for our whole lives, essentially. The movie, I just was hoping the movie would capture more than just, it almost feels like it's just one of his songs. The whole movie is just one thing, which is, the whole joke is, let's take this guy that's famously pretty clean and family friendly, mostly wholesome pop culture icon, and make a parody biopic about all the things, taking somebody like that and making them be the most like vile, cliched rise and fall of a pop culture icon kind of person. Mm-hmm. And everything it's not even embellished. It's like totally fictional. Like it starts out with him, like idolizing polka players, and he wants an accordion. They call it a squeeze box, apparently. I didn't know that until more recently. And of course, his parents are against it, and they're, like, we don't want our kid, being associated with that devil music. And it was totally ridiculous. And then, so it had every cliche at like every stage of the way. But then, of course, he goes on and becomes famous. Not only famous, he's the highest selling artist in the world. He's selling stadiums, And then, of course,
spoil it here?
Well, I don't really do like reviews or spoiler reviews or anything. Yeah, I talk about stuff assuming that people, if you want a review of a movie, go watch the thousands of review channels out there. This is talking more about our experience with these things. So if you haven't seen Weird and you are worried about it being spoiled for you, go watch it for free on Roku. But in the meantime, assuming that you've seen Weird or you don't care about spoilers, I'm personally like really tired of that spoiler culture, as if like you learn a plot point about something will ruin the whole experience for you. It's totally ridiculous. Because you can have the most like interesting story in the world that's told horribly, and it doesn't matter. And that's like the Star Wars prequels. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Like the Star Wars prequels are like, people love to defend them. I'm like, well, actually underneath it all, it's like actually pretty good. There's this interesting political story of, but the presentation of that story and the way it was told was awful.
The experience sucked.
So you can spoil, like if I've never seen the prequels and you tell me everything that happens and like.
So the idea was good, but the experience sucked.
Yeah.
So
Well, no, but with Weird, I didn't think the experience was bad. I did enjoy it. I laughed, and it was really funny, like the way that they presented it. But if you've seen that Funny or Die trailer, which is what the movie originated as, it was really the same thing. They took direct shots and scenes from the trailer and put them in the movie. They recreated it with Daniel Radcliffe. The trailer was enough. The trailer made the point, like, oh, wouldn't that be funny if there was a serious biopic that embellished Weird Al's life and took this guy that was a comedian and a pop culture parodier and made him into like this, cliche rise and fall of a rock star kind of thing. And so it just, to make a whole movie out of that, I was never invested enough. Because even in parody movies, like the best ones to me, like Airplane, Not Another Teen Movie, stuff like that, they still tell a story. There's still plot happening. There's still characters that are like you're invested in to some degree to make it work. Because like a parody is making fun of a real thing. It's not a farce. This was almost farcical, where it just went off the rails like kind of completely. It always took itself really overly seriously. Well, I mean, by the time he was down in Colombia, like fighting drug lords and stuff, I was like, all right, obviously the joke is like, how far can we push this idea? And that's why I just didn't feel like it needed to be a full-length movie, because the joke kind of got repetitive and played out. And then when he got assassinated at the end and everything, it was just like, okay, why? Like, for laughs, like, I don't know. And I know Al was a co-writer on it, so it was his thing. And I'm glad that he made it, and I'm glad that it's given him some notoriety and kind of, brought things back around to get people to like, be interested in Weird Al again, or to rediscover their interest in him. He's taken an extended break from writing parodies and stuff. Recently he did an interview where he said like, I spent 30 years or something like chasing the top 40 charts, and I'm just burnt out from that. I don't want to do that right now, but he didn't say categorically, no, I'm retired from making music or parodies or anything. He just said like, right now I'm focused on other things, which is another way of saying like his heart's not in it. I totally respect that. I just hope that Weird is not the end, not his final output, because I think he could go out on a better note if he were to do another album, maybe do like some kind of retrospective, not a retrospective of just like a box set or something, because he's already done that. I'm talking about like if he put together everything that's different styles and things, throughout that he's covered. Maybe do a completely original album, but just in styles of things. It doesn't have to be parodies. He could reinvent himself a little bit. He's just such a talented musician, and so is his band.
Performer and comedian too.
Yeah, like I think he has a lot more to offer, and I think Weird is just one thing that he was exploring. I hope that's not his final like major output. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that Weird definitely generated a lot of zeitgeist stuff where people are talking about Weird Al more, and there's more like kind of content being created and people looking back at UHF and reviews of Weird and stuff. A lot of movies come out and they go completely under the radar. They don't get even reviewed by, even like mid-level YouTubers and stuff or whatever. But I think Weird got some recognition, and I think that's awesome for Al. But
I'm still gonna see it.
I would definitely recommend anybody see it. If you're even a casual Weird Al fan, you'll find it funny. I mean, even if you just like biopics, or if you like parodies, or you like comedy, like it's definitely funny. But if you're a diehard Weird Al fan, and there's a lot of inside jokes, and one of the funniest running gags is that there's everywhere he goes during a certain part of his career, there's like all these random celebrities that I haven't gone back and done all the research, but some of them like weren't even alive. The celebrities were often played by real cameo celebrities, which I won't spoil because there's a lot of really good ones. I don't know if all these people were in the same place at the same time. Like, there's this party scene where you have everybody, I don't know, from like Jim Morrison to like the bass player from Queen, because like nobody knows his name. They're like, oh, it's the bass player from Queen. And everybody's always fawning over him and everything. But I loved all the cameos that were mixed in with like, okay, were these celebrities ever actually like together in the same place? They were playing around with reality and everything in a lot of different ways. So we'll wrap this one up, but I do want to mention that down the road at some point, I'm going to do my own homage the way that I do homages to music that I love by doing a drum cover video. So look out for that. And Dave, thank you.
You're welcome
for being here for this, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday, bro.
Weird forever.
Weird.
That's an Anthony Fantano thing. Okay. For this episode's song pick, in lieu of having something funny or parody, which would have been more appropriate for a Weird Al themed episode, but I also thought this was a good opportunity to continue to showcase the kinds of things that listening to Weird Al's music and going to his shows laid the foundation for in my life. So I'm involved in several musical projects at the moment. The main one, though, being After We Praey, Praey. You can find us at afterwepraey, praey.com. And late last year, we put out a live album, kind of a holdover as we record the follow-up to our debut album. And this is a song that will not be on that follow-up album, but hopefully on the follow-up to the follow-up. And what I love about this song, which is something that I like to think at least started with being exposed to so many different styles of music through Weird Al, is that this song, though not originally envisioned this way, eventually became a rap rock song. And it's so much fun to play. It's a really nice change up for our sound in general, and I think it perfectly encapsulates our new grunge category that we identify with, more or less, especially the new metal side of the new grunge. So be on the lookout for new music coming hopefully soon. And in the meantime, here's CWD recorded live at 2022's Rockfest in Richmond, Virginia.
I'm gonna rap a little bit and embarrass myself so you don't enjoy it.
This song's called CWD.
Can't think of what to say, won't delay. Don't know who I wanna be today. Every day I create a new way to play. The dumb will shift in into every shape. I don't need to know you to expose you, bitch. I don't need to know you to expose you. Can't face it. Won't take it. Don't make this something that it doesn't need to be. Take all of these attacks, won't go back. Don't remember why I'm here or how to act. If you read between the faded lines, there's no such thing as criticism. Everything is a hate crime. I don't need to know you to expose you, bitch. I don't need to know you to expose you. Can't. Won't. Don't. I just can't today, no! I don't need to know you to expose you, bitch! I don't need to know you to expose you, no!
Be sure to visit breathingunderwater.us. Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1 and on Twitter and TikTok at breathingdakine. That's at breathing DAKINE. And drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted. And all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.